Beautiful, beautiful Monday afternoon, evening, night to morning, wherever that you're tuning in from. Welcome to another episode of Hardship, the Now of Workplace, the Now Diversity, Leadership, and S. We are coming live today on a Monday. I have such a beautiful guest lined up today, and we're going to be talking about the importance of being a team player, and we're going to do a deep dive as to what a team player means, because the context is misconstrued sometimes and people are held accountable for the false reasons. So without further ado, let me bring on my guest for tonight. Welcome, Girish.
Hi, Mila. How are you this afternoon?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Doing good. Can't complain considering the times.
Yes, yes. And you are coming live all the way from the West Coast. So thank you again for taking the time and being here with us today.
I'm happy to be here.
All right. So just a quick synopsis to all the viewers listening and watching. So Girish, can you just tell us a little bit about who Girish is and what you do within one or two sentences?
All right. Who Girish is? Girish is a proud father of two daughters. One soon to be getting off of the teenage cycle, and one is actually working now. So I got two of them, and you know, I would assume that I'm a okay and as okay husband, but you got to ask my wife about that part. And I think in terms of I actually as a person, I feel like I think as you age, I think you probably get a little bit more wiser about what you want to be for the world. So I think if you ask me now, I think the person that I am right now is a person that wants to help people out, wants to share what I can, what I'm able to share. And in terms of work, I've been doing IT work that just, again, sometimes it takes a while to realize that you actually are just working for the sake of work and not beyond that, right? And I've been in IT for about 27 years now, and I've gone through quite a bit of companies, a lot of startups in Bay Area, actually, as a matter of fact, and a few of them that are big, Amazon Web Services, and now Google. So it's been an interesting journey so far.
That's fantastic. And that's a great journey, right? And being part of different teams and different organizations, you have been exposed to being on teams and what it means to be on teams. And a team is not necessarily and specifically and exclusive in organizations. It's also part of being a family. It's also part of your circle, your friendship circle, and in life, right? But on hardship, I always explore from a three-pronged perspective, because we exist in a three-pronged perspective, as in how we are at home transfers to how we are in society or in our communities, transfers to how we are in the workplace or in school, if school is your workplace. So let's focus on being a team player. Let's start with, what does it mean to be a team player, and what is your experience of being in teams or managing teams?
Right. And I think it's, in my mind, the difference between being in a team and managing a team is very subtle in some way, shape, or form, right? I think, from the way in which I look at it is, as in, again, I think it starts from, starts at home, right? Actually, to be honest. And I think you brought that up pretty well. For me, being a team player at home essentially means being supportive of the decisions that are being made at home, by my wife, by my parents, right, my extended family, because I come from a very extended family, where we make decisions as a family culturally in some ways, and respecting everybody's, hearing out everybody's thoughts more than anything else, and and considering those thoughts, right? I think even at a young age, I think I would always say, I was always told that you need to. It's very easy for you to listen to the oldest people, in that particular gathering. It's always you need to always pay attention to the people that won't have a voice. Meaning, in this case, somebody that may be young and maybe just we may exclude them just because they are young, right? And they don't have a voice, and we should not hear from them, right? And I've tried to put that into good practice at home. So I've always, whenever we talk about things as a family, before we make a decision, everybody gets their word. And actually, I usually start with my younger daughter and then go up, so that we don't overpower her most of the time. Okay, not doesn't happen all the time. I think there has to be an age after which you're granted the privilege. I think that happens probably like about when you're 13 or 14, but it's always been
Not when you're a toddler.
not when you're a toddler, right? So that's the family aspect of it. I think that's something that it kind of sort of, it's for me, it has been burnt into into my mind. That's how I need to do things in my family, and I think I take that actually to my work as well. Okay, so for me the work has always been, even when I was an individual contributor, and I've not been an individual contributor for the last, I'm going to say 15, 16 years, but for the first 11 years that I was an individual contributor, I used to make my voice heard, first of all, right, in a team. And I also need to actually, I will always say, like, hey, we didn't hear about somebody else, right? Somebody else in the team, that need their voice to be heard. So it's always that, and I think I carried that over to my management style as well. So always, whenever in my teams, the first thing that I say, and I think it's actually, probably I would even say, it's a transformation in some ways. I think I did have a little bit of a challenge, and I have to be first to admit it, when I moved from an individual contributor role to a manager role, right? And I think one of the challenges was to make sure that, how do I think beyond work, right? I personally think any team is a team. As a team, it goes beyond work in my mind, right? I think there's, we share everybody's, thought processes in terms of what they do and all that. So what I've done is, one of the things that I do, and even in my one-on-ones, I first 10 minutes I actually talk about, not just talking about weather and stuff like that. That's just regular conversation. I actually try to talk about their families. I try to talk about what they are trying to do for vacation. What are the just understand their situation better, and then basically go from there, right? So I think it helps you, in my mind, I think as a manager, for you to basically have to get that, to make sure that they understand that you're there for them, and that opens up their, how they share things. So that's one aspect of it, is what I would say, right? As to being part of a team player.
Wow, that is quite and in depth, but very heart aligned, right? And I like what you mentioned about supporting decisions, and you mentioned about the cultural aspect of it. So a lot of people might think, oh, it's different cultures, and you operate very differently from different parts of the world. But it's not that different when organizations are trying to build their culture, right? And then they adopt this narrative of, oh, you do not fit in here because it's a culture, you're not a very good culture fit. But at the same time, cultures are born or adopted based on the practices and symbols and behaviors that comes from a very singular lens, right? But at the same time, when a culture evolves, to your point, you mentioned about supporting decisions, giving a listening ear, and understanding someone, that challenges the status quo of what a culture is supposed to be. And you also mentioned about understanding someone's situation, right? You talk to people trying to understand whom they are as a person. And that is the core of leadership. And that is the core of 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 framing the whole frame of what team player ought to be and must be, right? Now I want to take this into a different direction now. So most of the times, right, I've heard a lot of discussions about what it means to be a team player, and sometimes it is coined into different terms. Where I've heard narratives from managers, and I've been part of teams where I hear my fellow managers or fellow peers mentioning about, oh, we need team players who will pick up the slack. We need team players who will do the work and will not ask questions. So, but being a team player is not about, you know, like inviting someone and telling them, oh, in order to be us, you need to do all the household chores. In order to be us, you need to show us your what do you call that? Your gratitude, or your allegiance to us. But that whole thing is mistaken as I look at it as hazing, right? When what do you call sororities and fraternities? They have a period of hazing and it's not legal anymore. Where when someone comes into the organization and they say, in order to be a player, you need to do this. You need to come out at 12 a.m., stand in the call. That comes like, that kind of like borderlines a little bit of abuse, but and mistreatment. But at the same time, I want to acknowledge this really important thing, misconception that a lot of people have being a team player is inviting someone into your team and then making them prove themselves to be. But we are forgetting to include their skills. We are forgetting to include their voice. We're forgetting to include or having the opportunity to getting to know them, to your point. So I want to hear a little bit about your thoughts about how the term team player is being misconstrued.
Okay, so this is a very interesting question, Mela, because the way in which, see, again, when I look at it from a work perspective, right, every work defines what culture is, right? So, for example, AWS or Amazon has its own culture, Google has its own culture, right? And you're right in one way in saying that, when you basically bring somebody over, right, when you hire someone, you are expecting that person to blend in or fit in to prove that they can fit in to the team culture, right? And I think organizations themselves have, to be fair to all the all the corporations, I think they've tried to tweak around to give that flexibility to see what you can do, right? In some ways, in some orgs more than not, and I will actually say Google, one of those employers that actually gives you a wide amount of flexibility to define what that is, right? So in this case, it is not Google actually in that way. I would actually say it's a good model in the sense that it basically allows you to have the diversity in
Right.
thought, diversity in what you do. You don't have to agree to every single thing, right? It's not like, okay, you know what, we're going to, it's the back to the old Roman culture. You're with me or not with me, right? You're part of this legion. You hold the shield. You move forward, and without you holding the shield, everything is going to break, right? That's the normal team culture, right?
Right.
That's the traditional culture that's existed for 2,000 years. If you look at it from a team playing
Mm-hmm.
perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what organizations like Google are trying to do, and I think I'm not saying they're 100%, there, and I think there are some managers that can take advantage of what
Right.
the flexibility is that's being provided, but you don't have to be a flanks. You don't
Mm-hmm.
have to be this, this very integrated mesh, in that way. You can be a flexible mesh, and you can
Mm-hmm.
still adopt, other people's ideas. And what we're realizing is you don't have to operate in that very like in that tight knit fashion. That's not the only way to success.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think if, there is a balance. I think everybody now realizes there's a balance between a person's and employees in this case, well-being, mental well-being,
Mm-hmm.
and how they perform at work,
Mm-hmm.
right, and how they interact with work. As a manager, you want to be able to provide them the opportunity to first treat them as an individual, treat them. I always say this: as a manager, my only big difference may be that I may know certain things that you may not know in terms of what I may have seen as a
Mm-hmm.
background. Okay, my aspirations and your aspirations are the same. My desire to take care of the family to your desire to take care of the family is the same. Everything is
Mm-hmm.
the same. Okay, I think if we start from the very basic things of what a human being cares about, as a manager, it becomes much easier for you to integrate somebody into the team more than anything else.
Right. I love it. Oh my God. I absolutely love what you just mentioned, and I echo you. You mentioned a really great point about when we start realizing, what do you mentioned about you want to take care of your family and I want to take care of your family. So that becomes a common denominator. And we start identifying each other as humans. That's such an important thing. Uh, and I love how you just, coined this whole thing about like different organizations do have their culture, and I love that. And that's one thing I really love about Google is that they are open. They are very much open, where they don't try to treat humans as though you're plasticine. I don't know what's the term used in the United States for plasticine, but it's a molding kind of a thing where you mold shapes into it and you create objects. But that's one thing, and that's what a culture is. I'm not going to say supposed to be, should become and must always evolve to be, right? And there's always a diversity element to it. Now, I want to talk a little bit about, you mentioned about understanding someone from a very humanistic perspective and supporting their decisions and including their decisions. So, back to being a team player, what does it make in order when you have a team of, it's quite easy when you just have a team of three people. But when you expand teams, right, for new managers or people who are moving from individual contributors to people sponsors, I don't want to call them managers, I want to call them people sponsors who really sponsor for their team. And they often struggle from, dealing with one or two team members and then to 10 team members or 15 team members. This is where the struggle comes. And this is where we see patterns of social exchange bias where certain team members will try to curry favor their managers or try to create this false sense of relationship, right? But but I want to really deep dive into how can we become valuable team members from a perspective of really acknowledging that each of us are unique. So what characteristics can be found in a great team member, and as a people manager or people sponsor, how can they cultivate certain characteristics of team members?
It's a great question, right? So in my mind, I think it's a very complex answer. I'm going to try to see if I can actually make this simple in some ways, right? Or at
Yeah.
least try to communicate that in a simple fashion. So see, for anybody to be a good team member, I think the key thing, one of the key ingredients, I think, for you to become to be a good team member is to just be open somewhat, right? Open to communicating, and even again, remember, there are a lot of people we need to take into consideration. There are a lot of people that may not like to necessarily communicate in the way in which we normally are used to, right? So I'm a person that is just like verbal, very like I'm very vocal about things and I always express things quickly. There are people that just won't take that time, they just are inherently reserved. They are like they're not comfortable, right? So you need to basically make sure that a good team member should make sure that they can communicate in whatever way they are comfortable with. They should be able to tell their manager or the people sponsor that, hey, this is the way in which I would like to be communicated. This is how I like to operate, right? That's one. The second thing is, as much as I think there's this common human bonding that is there are certain people that are private. They are very private and they want to be private. So you have to respect that. Okay. And I think the couple of key things as a good team member, you should say, what are my preferences? These are my preferences. I like things to be private. I don't like, like overlying, too much care, right? Because I always think a manager's job, a people sponsor's job is to customize the amount of effort and the amount of attention based on what that particular person, the team member needs. Because for me, I always tell my manager, okay, I don't like to be checked more than once every 2 weeks. Okay, I'm not, don't try to micromanage me in that way. I will give you the report once every 2 weeks. I'll absolutely update you on XYZ. So I basically set some rules. I expect my team members to kind of sort of tell what they want. Okay, and that is something that I actually look for even during the interview process itself. Actually, if I'm hiring somebody, I'm looking for someone to tell me very freely what they want, what their desires are. That's a first spot to becoming a good team member, right? The other aspect is to come in with even if you are a reserved person, you need to still know that everybody has their limitations and everybody has their failure, like strengths and weaknesses. So it's important for them to understand not their own weaknesses. It's important for them to understand that everybody has their own weaknesses as well. So when you come into a team, don't come with an expectation that that everybody's going to be like like just connecting with you, or everybody's going to work in the way in which you're working, right? So those are a couple of things that I will say as something that I look for, somebody that's like a good team member. And of course, beyond that, the basic instinct of like caring about each other. That's not outside, that's completely outside of work, right? It's interesting because the I've been working with quite a few colleagues in AWS. When this whole COVID stuff started, these are folks that used to work for me, right? They set up like a video chat once every week, like a happy hour. They set it up and they just invited me to it, and we just talk, talk family. They talk about what they're cooking at home and stuff like that. So it is nothing related to and I do that even with my current Google employees to a large extent, right? So you just need to, I think as a team member, you need to be more comfortable sharing just a little bit more so that people know, you know, what they expect, what they should do, what should they not do, basically, more than anything else.
I love that. So you mentioned 4 points that really stood out to me. So you mentioned the first thing that you mentioned about the communication, right? Understand how each of us communicate, and you brought up a really great point about some people are reserved and their communication method is different, and that ties in so much with diversity, right? And not just diversity, but the inclusiveness. When we talk about inclusion, most of the time we emphasize about, okay, we need to have open communication, but communication itself looks so nuanced to each person. To your point, you mentioned that some people are reserved, some people have different styles for communication, right? And enabling that is such an important factor, and also respecting and accepting how they communicate is a huge factor. Sometimes in meetings, I've been on in meetings where some team members just will not say anything, and even when we go around the table, I'll ask them, hey, let's go around the table, and if you have got thoughts, please share. But at the same time, I want you to know that the discussion does not end here. The discussion continues. So it gives them the opportunity to communicate in their unique style. So, and then that's one thing that I really like. And as leaders, we need to take that into consideration, especially when we have team members, and not to have the singular concept of, to be a team player, you need to communicate, you need to be boisterous and bubbly and blow horns, whatever that you have. And
yes, I got a video like this is the Silicon Valley, and we still have connectivity issues here, so I apologize.
oh, no problem at all. So no, welcome back. So this is live, so connection issues are are bound to happen, so don't worry about it. So as I was mentioning, I like that point. And then the second point that you mentioned about is the self boundaries, right? Setting boundaries is so important. And to your point, you mentioned about when you mentioned that you are really vocal about not being micromanaged to your manager, and that's open communication. That falls into the communication method, right? How some people communicate. And setting boundaries is this is something that I found on Forbes article. They say that one of the characteristics in being a great team player is also knowing how to set boundaries, and setting boundaries as to what your expectations are, going back to your point that you mentioned again, what your expectations are, and also understanding everyone's expectation, every team member's expectation, to really understand where they are coming from, how they are coming from, and how they are showing up in that space. Like, let's say if they are experiencing something at home, someone passed away, if they have got a disabled parent or disabled child, that's going to impact them. So setting boundaries and expectation and truly understanding that plays a huge part. Now that brings me to the question as to boundaries, right? When we set boundaries, at the same time we hear narratives of, to be a team player you need to be flexible. how can you be flexible and set boundaries at the same time? I want to hear your thoughts on this.
Okay, this is an very interesting question. Actually, something that I'm working with somebody else on, on the exact same thing, right? And now it's even more challenging because of the times, right? The COVID,
Yeah.
the fact that you're caregiving, your kids are at home, and how do you? And actually, this is exactly the same question that was asked this morning, actually, to me. Okay, and because you're trying to work out something that makes sense, right? And I think the thing is the flexibility. See, the thing is, I always say this: there's always a priority list for things at the end of the day. Okay, the priority always has to, for us, going back to, I always say, ignore work for a minute. Ignore work, okay? Because work is just work. Okay, at the end of the day, your priorities will still have to be for what you need to do at home. What, if you are, getting delayed by, like, doing xyz work by another day, it's okay. You know what, somebody's going to shout at you or somebody's going to shout at me, it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
But what you need to do at work takes priority over anything else, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I always say that prioritize in that fashion, right? That's one. In terms of flexibility and boundaries, the thing is, it really depends actually on, the type of work situation you are in to a large extent. And I'll always say that as long as you are able to see, the first and foremost thing is, there are certain golden rules you have to write down and basically say, if these golden rules are not violated, then I may be flexible. Okay, you should
Mm-hmm.
not say by default I am flexible, right? Because there are a lot of people that come into organizations thinking that they have to prove, right?
Mm-hmm.
And actually, this is actually a conversation with two different conversations in the last 2 days. One was somebody that came into my org and trying to prove something, and I'm worried, frankly, that he's taking too much of work. Okay, and there's this other person. She wants to make sure that she's not, while setting up boundaries, that she's not, she's not perceived as, not flexible, right? So two different challenges. So all I'll say is, write down those top three golden rules as to what you care about. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
you cannot sacrifice either on one way or the other. You cannot sacrifice it, whether you're trying to extend yourself and do stuff, or whether you're going to expand your boundaries, if you will, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I always think it works both ways. It cuts both ways, because if you put yourself boundaries and if you want to be flexible, you feel bad that you're not going to be able to, that you're not going to be able to be flexible, and you feel like, am I doing something wrong? At the same time, if somebody is being too flexible, right, and too abusing their own time, you're paying for something else somewhere else. That's the bottom line, right? So
Mm-hmm.
take those three golden rules or two golden rules, whatever the number is. If you run by that and basically say it's okay, then you decide to be either flexible or not flexible, is what I say. So again, it's something that's custom that you have to decide, but you need to decide what those top two things are. Okay, I cannot decide it for you, unfortunately.
No, great point. Great point. And I like how you mentioned about the golden rules, right? What do you care about? Oftentimes, to your point, oftentimes we have people, new team members, or individual contributors transitioning into people sponsor roles, right? Where they feel that they need to prove something, they need to show that they can do, they are worthy of this position. And very soon they forget about setting boundaries and they automatically take on this persona that, oh, I'm flexible, I can do this, I'm flexible, I can do that. To your point again, taking on too many responsibilities, which then hurts them. At the same time, I want to highlight this very important point. I've seen it in my corporate tenure. I've seen it in the past 15 years of my career where a lot of people take on so many different responsibilities, and it portrays two sides, right? It portrays that it's either you're a good person managing your time, or at the same time you are portraying this image to someone else to take advantage of you. And I've seen it pan out. And as a young people sponsor, when I first started my career, I started in engineering and I went to becoming an educator, and I was new in leadership roles, and I was like, okay, I need to prove myself. As I was taking on roles, I thought, okay, I'm really flexible. At the same time, the more flexible I became, I forgot about setting my own boundaries, which then took a toll on my mental health, which then took a toll on the way that I performed. At the same time, it took a toll on how other people perceived me or respected my boundary. And that's what I've been seeing, and you see in organizations as well, and young leaders, or not even just young leaders. When I say young leaders, it's just not age, but leaders who are becoming new, coming into people sponsor roles newly, right? They hit burnout really quickly. But that's a good tip that you mentioned, the golden rule. What do you care about? And then intersect those two, setting boundaries and what does flexibility mean to you. So, and that brings me to the next point. I want to, I want to identify addressing conflicts, right? So I've been researching some of the characteristics of what a team player must should possess or can possess. And one of the characteristics is addressing conflicts. Because when you're in a team and when you're considered as a team player, sometimes what can be dumped on you, or sometimes you will be looked as the odd one out because you are not conforming to groupthink, and conflicts come about, right? But it's so imperative to be a great team player to address conflict, and this intersects with flexibility and boundaries as well, and communication, right? So let's talk a little bit about conflict and addressing conflict, because conflict itself is so nuanced and there's a diverse perspective as to how some people approach conflict or reject conflict, or the communication style that is involved even within conflict. So I want to hear your thoughts on this. How do we address conflicts in the intersection of being a team player?
See, one of the key things, I think it's a very human in nature. Going back to the way in which I look at it, right? Whenever there is a conflict, you normally mostly take a defensive position. You start defending first, okay? And it's happened to me many times. It probably happened to me last week. I'm pretty sure about it, right? But that's our default behavior, right? And as in a team, whether you're a manager and talking to a team of managers, whether you're talking to your own team, right? And you're a team player and an individual contributor, you basically, like, the conflict usually whatever the root of the conflict is, you normally go to a defensive position on any conflict. Okay, and usually that comes out as offense, but it's actually you're playing defense in some way, shape, or form, right? What I always say is, like, okay, so first thing is, as a team player, as a person that belongs to the team, you need to understand that it's very natural for you to defend. Okay, as a manager also, you need to understand that it's very natural for including you and other people that they will actually defend if there is a conflict. So if you're trying to resolve a conflict within the team, or if you're trying to, if as a team player, if they run into a conflict, first thing is recognizing that you may actually defend is number one, and go through that motion. You cannot say that you cannot go through and try to defend yourself. We are human. We know we need to do it to at least exercise our demons, if you will, in some ways, or get it out, basically, in some ways, right? To get the defense mechanism out. But once you're done with that, I always suggest this, and I always suggest, like, hey, go back and think about the fact that maybe there is some element of truth in if you're working with somebody else in your team or outside of your team, there is maybe an element of truth about what they said. That may be okay, that you don't have to go into conflict mode on, right? So think about what that is, right? And there are ways of saying things. Normally, I always think it's a going back to your communication aspect of it. Normally, conflicts arise because there is no clear communication, or people there is a perception, okay? Because you perceive that somebody is doing this, or you perceive, even worse is the perception that you have that somebody is not doing it. Okay, so you basically assume this person is okay. He's most common thing. Oh, this guy is taking, or this girl is taking so much time to do this when this needs to be done within, like, whatever time. It's somebody's perception that is leading to a conflict. So understand the root cause, and then question the person that actually is, question in a way again, goes back to the communication skill. Question in such a way that you actually try to understand a little bit more about where that difference is coming from and try to address it. Okay, that's what I would say. And I think, again, it's easier said than done because it takes a little bit more, maturity. And even I will say I'm not mature. As I said, I need to understand from time to time when I go to my defensive mode. It takes a while for you to let go of the ego. Defense is also about ego. Okay, so you need to let go of the ego and basically come back to a position where you can very open to hearing.
I love that you mentioned about the ego. That is such a huge part of all of us, right? That's a huge part of all of us. I don't care, what some people say. There are some leaders who say, "Oh, I don't have an ego." Ego is present in everyone, no matter how much you meditate. I meditate every day, and I still have an ego. It's just a human nature. Like when I have fights with my husband, I have an ego. It's like I immediately go into the mode of no, no, I didn't say that. But that's to your point. It's the motion, right? It's the motion that we go through in understanding. But I also like what the 3 points that you mentioned about, conflict is about perception and communication and truly understanding the differences. And I also want to add to that is the expectations. Sometimes when we do not clarify those expectations, right, going back to the point where we spoke about flexibility and boundaries, right? And sometimes we have false expectations, going back to communication again, and really speaking about what is everyone's expectation, right? To your point, someone can get angry about, oh, this person is taking such a long time without understanding what's going on. But if we come together and say, okay, these are my expectations. These are my expectations. But you can't have expectations of someone else without understanding their strengths, their skills, their weakness, right? At the same time, we can't impose something onto them. This is another layer that adds onto, right, to the conflict. Conflicts also come about when under the theme of being a team player, we often say, okay, I think you're good in this, Girish. You are going to go and design all the artwork just because, I saw Girish draw a painting and I immediately assign something to you without even consulting you. That is imposing something onto you, not even understanding what your strengths are, what your skills are, what your purpose, what your interests are, because all those things play a part in someone being a valuable team player as well, really accepting them. And I like how you mentioned about understanding the difference. And that plays a huge part in diversity of thoughts, diversity of behavior. And a lot of the time people think, no, there's no such thing as difference. We all need to be on the same page. And let's talk a little bit about what it means to be on the same page in terms of goals and in terms of being a team player.
I think in terms of goals, I think everybody has their own goals, right? Again, it goes back to, if you distill it down, in my mind, it's always three things that you care about, for your you're doing things for your family. You have ego. You want to improve on, nobody comes to work saying, I'm going to flunk at work today. Okay. Nobody comes and says like, I'm going to give my worst today at work. Right. So it's not happening. Right. So we all have common aspirations in my mind. We all, we're all doing something for, us or our families. Okay. We're all doing things for, we think it's going to help us either get better, not as a human being. Okay, let's be very clear about it. Maybe it's just, in some aspects of what we think is important to us in that way, right? So if it's technology, it's technology. If it's something else, it's something else. So we come with some common desires, okay, that that there are common goals that that we have. So that is fundamental. I don't think anybody anybody can question anybody that, okay, that why are you working, or why are that's there. Now translating that to making them a team player, right? And under the, remember, as much as I think as a manager, unless you're running your own company, your organization defines what the goals are for them. right? Be it, you know, every great company will still have some, dollars that need to be met, or some expectations that needs to be met. How do you take that as a manager and kind of sort of, from a team player perspective, how do you distill it, right? So in terms of, getting on the same page, in my mind, means that you all first understand that, that you're all working for the certain basic things that you care about in your life. And, in terms of, there are some areas where I think you will be, going back to the work related stuff, there are some things that you bring in that you'll have unique value, right? And there are certain things that, that you probably will have to learn, be open to learning, right? And in open to hearing other thoughts, not when, maybe you're not interested at all, but hear other people's thoughts when you're not interested in that area, right? At least let other people decide for you in some ways, in the team. And making sure that you you're there for the, for your team, right? In whatever way it needs to be, right? It doesn't have to be that you have to be the, the person carrying the flag. Okay, a lot of people normally think like that, I have to carry the flag to be a team player. You don't have to be carrying the flag every single time. Okay, there, I think wherever there are opportunities, you think you can contribute, you should be able to contribute and allow others to support you. At the same time, you support others so that others can be successful, right? So my thinking is, you should be happy to have other people succeed in your team for you to be a team player. If you have that mentality that other people will be succeeding, and and you're happy that they are succeeding because you contributed something to them, that's perfectly fine.
I love that you use the analogy of the flag analogy. You don't need to carry the flag. I do not know if you are aware of this online game. It's called World of Warcraft. And I used to play that game quite a bit. And it's interesting. And on this online game, there's excuse me, there's this session where you go into, it's called PvP. So you go as a team, and then what you're supposed to do is alliance versus horde, and you're supposed to capture the hordes if you're playing alliance, or you're supposed to the horde if you're playing horde, you're supposed to capture alliance's flag. So two posts are on each on one end, right, on extreme ends. So you're supposed to go as a team and go capture the flag, and it's usually a team of 5, and you play the characters, either a hunter, a mage, a warrior, a paladin, a priest. So you go as a team, and it's interesting even on online games, right? One person will always want to capture the flag, saying that I'm a team player, I'm going to sacrifice, I'm going to do this, and the rest of the team members will feel as though they are not contributing, or if they say, oh, I want to capture the flag, and that becomes a whole chaotic conflict itself. And it's an online game, but you're playing with people. But that's a good analogy you use, and that transfers into the virtual world as well, even when we play games, because a team is not just present in an organization. A team is present, to your point as we started the conversation, Girish, it's present at home, right? You include your youngest daughter opinion, her thought, her say in discussions, and it transfers into every space. Like, your colleagues still invite you to do a video chat. I still have friends from different states, or different colleagues from different states, who invite me to play trivia, and we still come together and speak, and we still practice a community where we can talk, we can always challenge ourselves, and at the same time, no matter where we belong, that concept of team player still shows up. Can you imagine taking a road trip with your friends, and one person will say, okay, we'll switch up driving.
Mm-hmm.
That's also it's about being a team player. So we covered a lot of valuable points today, Girish. So to wrap up, you mentioned a lot of great points, and listeners out there who are wanting to have more information in how can we become effective team players, or how to lead your team members in being a team player, or if you're a manager, individual contributor, becoming not a manager. I use the term people sponsor because you had to live them out. As Girish mentioned, going back to your first point, communication is a key component, where you have to understand how each individual speaks or communicates or assimilates or digests information. And also, to your point, Girish, you mentioned about setting boundaries. Setting boundaries is a great, great factor in building a team and being a team player, right? It's also, to your point, understanding the rule, understanding the goals, and being flexible at the same time, setting boundaries. And also, you mentioned about conflicts, right? Understanding the difference, embracing the ego, going through the motion. A lot of the times when we speak about conflict, people often say compromise, but compromising is someone has got to give up something. It's usually one of the parties gives up, and there's imbalance. So I like that you mentioned understanding difference and going through the motion. Any other tips that you want to add, Girish, before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think you summarized it better than I would summarize it. So I think that you did a pretty good job there. I again, my thinking is as a manager, we are all see. The thing is, as a manager, you're always operating under some direction in some ways, right? And I think it's for a it's for a good manager to figure out what that balance is. What is that he can shield your employees from, right? I think this is just a manager speak, I guess, more than anything else. Uh, you want to make sure, and I think one thing that I didn't mention is at the end of the day, there is a trust, operative trust that is that is underlying, everything. And I think that trust comes from the fact that your employee knows that your manager is going to be with them and supporting them no matter what decisions they make. And B, for you to know as a manager that the employee is going to make the right call based on how she or he sees at any given point of time, that you don't have to question them in any way, shape, or form, right? So if that trust and for you, you need to establish that trust to be a good team player and be a good manager in vice versa, actually. So
I love it. I love it. So today's episode, for those people who just tuned in, we are talking about what it means to be a team player and how can we build an effective team where all our team members do feel valued. Thank you again for being here, Girish. It's always such an honor to speak with you and have you on Hardship, the now of workplace diversity, leadership, and us, because we always need to talk about the currency, right? And people want currency because people feel that their purpose is aligned with their skill set. It's aligned with where do they belong and how they are accepted, right? So, folks out there listening, remember, being a team player is not just about having someone do all the dirty work, and it's never about that. Being a team player is about truly understanding how one is, their skill set, their strengths, their weakness, their purpose, and accepting them and including them in a space where they are allowed to take ownership of whom they are, at the same time set the expectations and learn about the expectations of everyone on the team. This has been Hardship, the now workplace diversity leadership, and I'm your host, Mila Duchon. Thank you for joining us. Till next week, we will be back on a different topic. Thank you again for being here, Girish. Please do not go anywhere as we wrap up. Please give it a thumbs up and like. Till next week, we will see you again. Stay on the line, Girish.
All right. Thank you.